from the BBC World Service in association with ABC and All India Radio. This is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell in London, where I've been making the most of some autumn sunshine alongside really getting into the Men's T20 World Cup. It's one of my favourite tournaments.
I can see why there's a smile on your face, Alison. It's Jim Maxwell. I'm up the coast out of Sydney after about 5 months of lockdown and mucking around, and what you see behind me is pretty much how it is every day. Beautiful, near the beach and the rest of it. But England are going well. They must be favourites now to win the T20 after India's humiliation at the hands of Pakistan. And don't forget Australia.
I hear you, Jim, and good to hear other stories rather than all those lockdown travails. Hello, everybody. I'm Charu Sharma for All India Radio. Glad to be back home in Bangalore after this storm-drawing trek of ours to the northern Kumaon Himalaya. And by the way, Vanity won. I had this sort of salt and pepper, heavy trekking beard, but I said, let's take it off. So I took it off.
Let's start with the Men's T20 World Cup because it has certainly lived up to expectations so far. The reigning champions, the West Indies, lost their opening 2 matches, and for the first time ever at a World Cup, Pakistan beat India. Yes, they thrashed their greatest rivals by 10 wickets. And, well, it was a win so big that, I don't know whether you saw it, it reduced, well, the father of Captain Babar Azam, it reduced him to tears in the stands. Then on Tuesday, Pakistan got their second win in 3 days by beating New Zealand by 5 wickets. And if you remember, Pakistan came into this tournament in the UAE, after the disappointment of both New Zealand and England opting not to tour the country, New Zealand pulling out, England pulling out. Then a lack of preparation, there was administrative and coaching upheaval. But, just how good have they looked to you, Charu and Jim? Charu, can you bring it to say that Pakistan could actually be the team to beat?
Well, without question. Well, I think India's leading contender tag has been seriously dented for sure, and Pakistan have taken that place right now, especially after their second win as well. And if India don't win against New Zealand, they may not make it to the knockout. So this is really tough one for India at this point of time. Obviously, they had a point or two to prove, Pakistan. You mentioned some of their troubles. And I do remember a couple of weeks ago suggesting that UAE is their homeland. That's their home pitch. They're perhaps more used to conditions in the UAE than any other team.
Have you enjoyed watching them, Jim?
I've been very excited, as ever. I mean, Pakistan have always been the most mercurial team in international cricket. They can play like world beaters and play like novices sometimes. And that may happen in this tournament. It's the nature of T20 cricket. It only takes 1 or 2 players to have an explosive day and it can turn the game. But they do seem to have some qualities there with their bowling. They've got good backup and depth in the batting, as we saw against New Zealand. So, they're looking very, very good.
Alison, just very quickly, you mentioned Babar Azam's father, and of course that was a nice emotional high for him. But I do think that that's also a very big difference. Babar Azam has not proven to be Pakistan's strategically or tactically finest skipper, but I think he's brought in a certain sense of calm. And as you know, Pakistan's mercurial performances are often related to the fact that the leadership is in disarray. So, a 2-pointer there for Babar Azam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, talking of leadership, Charu, I mean, we spoke on the show, didn't we, last week about the importance of this T20 World Cup trophy for Virat Kohli and the outgoing coach Ravi Shastri. Before the tournament began, you would have I think you did probably put India as favourites, didn't you? But have you revised that already, or are you no knee-jerk reaction?
While one injured swallow doesn't make a summer, Alison. So hopefully they continue to do well in the next match or two. That leading contender tag might be back. For the moment, of course, as I said, seriously dented without question. And I wonder how Virat Kohli is taking it, and Ravi Shastri too. I do think Kohli's individual reputation will suffer if India do not make even the knockout. So there must be serious concern in the Indian camp right now. What
do you think they need to do to make sure they notch a win against the New Zealanders? And do you reckon there might be any changes to the side?
Well, there's a lot of talk for sure. I mean, there's talk about, for instance, Hardik Pandya. Shardul Thakur is an obvious replacement. You might remember Jimmy did very well in Australia some time back. So I think that one change is ready to happen. There's also talk about the spinners. So yes, at least 2 options, not so much on the batting side, but on the bowling side, perhaps an all-rounder in Shardul Thakur and maybe a different spinner instead of Varun.
I do want to talk about, what has been the biggest talking point of recent days, which has been around the South African wicketkeeper, Quinton de Kock, because the match against the West Indies, de Kock made himself unavailable for that game shortly before the start, citing at the time personal reasons. Now, this came after Cricket South Africa had issued a directive some 5 hours before the match, stating that all their players should make the gesture of taking the knee prior to World Cup games in what they've quoted as a united and consistent stance against racism. Now, people on social media were very quickly then discussing de Kock's personal reasons for pulling out of that match. The board later issued a statement acknowledging de Kock's decision not to take the knee. So that sort of clarified that was the reasoning behind him pulling out. Since then, Quinton de Kock has issued a statement apologising and saying that he is happy to take the knee. He says, "I know I have an example to set. We were previously told we had the choice to do what we felt we wanted to do. I chose to keep my thoughts to myself and thought of the pride of playing for my family and country." He goes on, "I didn't understand why I had to prove it with a gesture when I live and learn and love people from all walks of life every day." He says, "When you are told what to do with no discussion, I felt like it takes away the meaning. If I was racist, I could easily have taken the knee and lied, which is wrong and doesn't build a better society." This was a complex one, wasn't it? It absolutely set social media alight, I guess, because there was a vacuum of silence from Quinton de Kock initially, wasn't there, given that he just didn't play and then nobody heard from him directly. I think it's a good thing that he has set out to explain his side of where he's coming from. Broadly speaking, though, Jim and Charu, it presents this moral dilemma, doesn't it, as to whether gestures should be mandated.
Well, it was a bit of a shocker. And as you mentioned, the silence didn't help. The clarification has certainly helped. And to just give my perspective on it, I also believe that, symbolism on an individual level has to be left to the individual. But in this scenario, I will have to disagree, because if it's a team diktat, and however late it may be, somebody, to take a case in point, might unfortunately die just before a match, and then you wear a black band. You can't say, "Oh, I wasn't given enough notice." And this is a new global phenomena of showing support with Black Lives Matter, and could have been any other topic as well. So at the World Cup, with that level of visibility, and if the whole team does it together, I think it sends a fabulous message. If you're going to leave it to the individual to show it, it just sort of shows that there might still be differences of opinion, which in this case, there should be none.
Yes, it's a shame Nelson Mandela's not still alive. He would have sorted this out in 5 seconds. This is a massive failure on the part of South Africa in terms of how they manage their players. They should never have got to where it is now. Quinton de Kock should have perhaps had more common sense in view of particularly South Africa's position in regards to racism. Well, this needed to be sorted out before the tournament started.
Yeah, I think when he says, I don't understand why I had to prove my beliefs or my position with a gesture, that again comes down to communication, doesn't it? And learning and education and listening to those who are impacted.
From the BBC World Service, this is Stumped on All India Radio.
Right, well, after 8 months without a match, and after all the upheaval of the Taliban's takeover of their country, Afghanistan's men began their T20 World Cup in quite some style.
Rashid Khan then to bowl and gets the wicket. The googly does for Brad Wheel. Scotland all out for 60. Afghanistan too good for Scotland. They've won by a mighty 130 runs.
Yeah, quite a statement that from Afghanistan, that their first match since the Taliban takeover of the country. Mujib ur Rahman took 5 wickets for 20 runs in what was his first ever World Cup game. Now, former England coach Andy Flower is working with Afghanistan during this World Cup as a consultant, and I'm delighted to say that he is with us on Stumped.
Ellie, nice to see you too. I am doing fine, thanks. Yeah, and it was a great start.
I know that you're someone who has always taken an interest in politics or engaged in the world around you. Was there ever for you any sense of reservation about becoming involved with Afghanistan cricket post the Taliban takeover?
No, not at all. Things are changing all the time in our own lives, in political situations, and their country is in a state of flux at the moment. And actually, no one quite knows what direction it's going to take in the short term. So, no, in pure cricketing terms, it was a really easy decision for me. I'm friends with some of these players from my earlier interactions. I know how they approach the game. I like the way they approach the game, very positively, very aggressively. And they do play a very brave and exciting brand of the game.
Jim Maxwell, nice to talk to you again, Andy. Just looking ahead, this ICC meeting's coming up next month to discuss the game's future in Afghanistan. Do you have a message or anything you'd like to say about that meeting and the continuation of both men's and women's cricket in Afghanistan?
Well, obviously, the number one result from any communication that the Afghanistan authorities have with the ICC, the best result would be that the men's and the women's games are well supported in the country. That would be the ideal outcome of any communication. Given what's happened recently in Australia, I don't know if it's cancel or postpone the test match. I think a reasonable stance at this point in time would be to better understand the situation and make sure that everyone is gathering the information that would allow people to understand the situation as best as possible.
I'd imagine you've had some conversations, despite the language problems, with the players. How do they feel about this tournament after all that's happened in Afghanistan this year?
Well, Jim, they are genuinely excited to be part of another world tournament. They are obviously concerned, like everyone else, about the future and the safety of all citizens of Afghanistan. But those are situations that are out of their power at the moment. And they are very simply representing their country as well as they can. And a big part of that is being able to focus on the cricket. And they do that really well. And I respect them a lot for the way they play the game, but also with how they're dealing with some of these other potentially very large distractions.
Andy, hi, this is Charu Sharma for All India Radio. Thanks so much for joining us. And congratulations on that incredible first win. What's their level of belief of beating the best?
I would say their level of belief, given how young they are into the international scene, is extremely high. I'm very impressed with their level of confidence and self-belief. And I think Lance Klusener has done a really good job in that regard. But I also think a large chunk of it is because they are very resilient people. I've seen it close at hand when they've been in my sides as individuals, and they seem to handle the sporting pressure situations pretty comfortably. Of course, not always succeeding, but the manner in which they deal with the situation at hand, the manner in which they come back from losses or personal, I suppose, failures, and handling themselves in amongst some other international stars, I think they should take a lot of credit for the way they handle themselves.
One more question, just slightly on the political side of things. Given your Zimbabwe background and, of course, the role you played in the famous black armband protest with Henry Olonga back in the 2003 World Cup, do you sort of identify in some ways with the Afghanistan cricketers? Do you see there's some sort of bond almost in that you both come from backgrounds where there has been an element of political unrest and turmoil?
I think it's part of why I was very attracted to them as a team, actually. I saw parallels, if you just ignore some of the political and human rights stuff. I saw parallels with us as a very small cricketing nation in Zimbabwe, and similar situation with Afghanistan. We probably had a much longer cricketing history than them. Their administrators and their cricketers and their small coterie of coaches should take a lot of credit for the pace at which they've developed. And then, yes, I think there's a slight affinity that I feel because of some of the political upheaval that their country's gone through. From quite a selfish perspective, I suppose, it's quite nice to be part of something that is slightly more than just trying to win a tournament.
Andy, you've been a part of so many franchise T20 leagues around the world, and most recently, of course, in the IPL, as well as the assistant to the Punjab Kings. How has all this helped you coming into this tournament, all the experience of different teams, perhaps not national teams, but different bunches of fabulous players?
Well, it's been a really fascinating experience for me, going from international coaching to franchise coaching. I think whenever you're working with groups of people and in pressure situations, if you are observing what's happening, it is in a professional sense and interpersonal sense. It's really fascinating stuff. So the franchise type cricket that you tend to play is usually you're together for a month, or in the IPL's case, a couple of months. They're very short-term projects. And of course, winning is all important. The results are all important. Nonetheless, you're still looking as a leader or a facilitator to make the most of the potential within your dressing room. The same goes for this international side in the World Cup. So it's actually quite a similar situation.
You've been around the world and back twice, once as a player, now as a coach. What next?
Well, I hope I haven't completely done the circle yet. I'm still really enjoying it. I'm still on that trip around the world for the second time and really loving it. So I've enjoyed my involvement in the IPL, Charu, and really enjoyed working with Anil and KL Rahul at Punjab Kings. Obviously, it would be nice at some stage to lead a side in the IPL. And I might go back into international coaching at some stage in the future as well. Now that my kids are older and have left home, I feel less bad about being away for big chunks of the year.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to see what direction you go in. Well, it's fascinating to hear from Andy Flower, who's experienced the highs of an Ashes win in Australia in 10-11, but then the lows of an enormous loss in 13-14, but significantly the role he's now performing with Afghanistan and that insight. It was fascinating. Well, that's it for this week's Stumped here on All India Radio. Don't forget that you can follow us on Twitter. We're at BBCWS Sport and use the hashtag BBC Stumped. My thanks to Charu, Sharma, Jim, Maxwell, and to you all for watching and listening. And we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Stumped is a BBC sport production for the BBC World Service in association with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and All India Radio.